like Mark said, it's all about having the positive story to tell, and it's just the conversations, having conversations with people, building relationships. Through those relationships comes influence and trust, where people can trust us to give us the right answers to those questions. It's coming up with funny things to start those conversations with. It's just like a cocktail hour or any social gathering. And one of those funny things that we have in agriculture is it almond or is it almond? And Brent is here to tell us and answer that question. But there are a lot of times through social media, and in fact, we just had a conversation, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where I caught someone that said they had almond butter, and that's exactly, I retweeted it and said, is it almond or almond? That is the question. And it launched into a long conversation, and I was able to draw Brent into that conversation, who has firsthand knowledge of raising almonds. And with that, Brent, can you explain to us the difference between almond and almond?
I can. I'll also give you a little more background. As was mentioned, I'm a third generation almond or almond grower. And my grandpa started growing almonds back in the 40s, and right here in the Central Valley in Ripon. And I actually moved away for college, came back to the ranch a few years ago. So I grew up in the ranch, then I lived in the city for a long time, and now I'm back on the ranch. And I'm just loving the opportunity that I've had. I feel really blessed to have lived in a city and seen firsthand for many years how disconnected a lot of people are from food. Because it's just tough. You're in a city. So it really has given me a passion to connect that. And as Ray mentions all the time, building those bridges and connecting communities. It's a real passion of mine. So that's why I'm here and doing social media. But to answer Ray's question, there is two ways to say almond and almond. You can say that there is a tree outside and it's a palm tree. You don't call it a Pam tree. I don't know anybody that calls it a Pam tree. And most people also go fishing, and when they go fishing, they might fish for salmon, not salmon. I have heard people call them salmon. So, but most people call them salmon, and most people call them palm trees. So in the language, it kind of goes both ways. But with almonds, what I've come to learn is I used to think just growers called them almonds because, as I mentioned, we lived in Southern California away from any type of almond farmers, and you say almond there, nobody knows what you're talking about. So I've now gotten used to saying almond most of the time when I'm talking to somebody who I might think might not know what they are. But what I always thought that was because growers called them almonds. Well, what I realized is as the almond industry has grown in California and across the world, it's pretty apparent that almond came out of a very small portion of the Central Valley where I happen to be. So if you go down to Southern California and talk to almond growers, most of them are almond growers, and they will call themselves almond growers, not almond growers. So clear as mud, right? The bottom line is you can call them whatever you want, I think is the key. I call them almonds, but I certainly don't mind that they're called almonds. Yes, there are a couple questions, great.
I come from an agricultural background to a small degree, and I was always told that up in Chico and that region, and we were always told that they were almonds until they knocked the L out of them.
Yes. Yes, and you just dated yourself a little because we don't knock them anymore. We shake the L out of them now with machines. So that's actually the joke that became part of this conversation with Ray on Twitter the other day. And that's kind of what we joke about, is that there are almonds until you shake them, and then you shake the L out of them, and they're almonds. So that's kind of that ongoing joke. But as I mentioned before, I really saw firsthand, we lived in Los Angeles for a long time in the city, and then we also were in Washington for a number of years, very disconnected from almonds up there in terms of growing almonds, because it's really in California is the only place in the country that they're grown. And so in both of those areas, we were really able to see firsthand how disconnected people were from almonds. That was our world. But in the city especially, we really just saw how disconnected people are. And that's something that really has become a passion of mine, like I mentioned. And one of the things I really believe is that there's three components to life, really. I'm a person and I have a story. My story happens to contain agriculture and contains almonds. I might meet somebody, they have a story, and their story may or may not include anything with agriculture, and that's what I found a lot of times in the city, is that they may not have any experience with agriculture whatsoever, with farming, never stepped foot on a farm, they've lived in the city their whole life, food comes from the store. And then there's this idea of agriculture and farming and food and where it comes from. And so as we try to build communities in social media, one of the things I try to do is recognize that I have a story and they have a story, and so I try to develop a relationship with people and find out what their story is, and I obviously know what my story is. Somewhere there's going to be an overlap. It may or may not be around food, but there's probably going to be an overlap there somewhere. And if there is, then you develop that relationship with that person, and eventually, because my story includes ag, and ag exists, farming is going to come into that conversation, because through a relationship, those people are going to start to value the fact that farming and food is important to me. And so then those bridges get built naturally, as Ray keeps talking about those bridges. And that, for me, is what I try to do. It's a long process, but in social media, that's why I get really excited, because I can find places where stories overlap. And it doesn't really have to necessarily have anything to do with food. It could be something like, in my case, running. I love to run. And I run in races and I jog constantly, about 6 days a week. And so I've gotten involved in a Twitter chat, hashtag of Run Chat. And because people that run tend to be healthy and tend to like to eat healthy, and almonds, over the last few years especially, have really become highly known as a healthy snack, there's some very natural overlays there. And so I've just had a great time filling my Twitter timeline with runners, and just have had a great time getting to know people and talk to them, and little by little, they find out who I am. Oh, you grow almonds? I love almonds. I just bought almonds yesterday. Well, here you go. Now here's a whole conversation, right? So it becomes very easy at that point. I think it's when we try to force it too quickly that it falls apart. So those building bridges is just something that it needs to be a natural process, and when it's natural and happens in the course of a relationship, it can be very powerful. So that's just really one of the ways that I use social media. I take my time. I don't rush into it. I've got people. I don't have a blog. I actually do have a blog, but there's barely anything on it. And the reason why is because I don't know. I just don't like blogging. But I got a lot of people like Ray pressuring me to get into blogging more. I prefer to use Twitter because I'm out on the ranch, I have my smartphone, I can shoot a picture, I can do a real-time tweet of what's going on at the ranch, and there's people that see that, and I start interactions very quickly. It doesn't take a whole lot of my time. So one of the things I need to work on is that blog, but right now I'm really heavily involved in Twitter and Facebook, and that's where I do a lot of my interaction.
On the note of the blogging, and I was resistant to blogging for the same exact reason that Brent is talking about. It's so much easier that when you have a minute here, a minute there, to send a tweet out. Well, one of the things that I've started doing instead of writing a dissertation for a blog is I've done a few tutorials, and through my connection with some of the other farmers, namely Mike Haley, Farmer Haley on Twitter, we created a new website in the last few weeks. It's farmerbloggers.com. To get the actual blog, it's farmerbloggers.com/blog. And what it does is it actually aggregates about 20 plus different blogs from farmers throughout the United States. We don't have anyone from Canada yet, but it's from Florida to California up to the Dakotas. And what it does is it allows a person that wants to follow farmers and their stories can just go to one site and follow those stories. And instead of a farmer having to aggregate those stories from different blogs, this does it automatically for them. There's also, like I mentioned, the NoahCaliforniaFarmer.com effort is blogs and pictures. The same, it's a one blog site of different California farmers, and I was politely told on Twitter by someone from NOAA California Farmer, maybe Katie Pinky, that I know is watching now, that the hashtag for that is KACF for NOAA California Farmer, and that's a lot of the reasons why we do the social media outreach. To sum up what Brent said, it's really the least common denominator. Somewhere, somehow, our lives and our stories overlap. And we have so many generations removed from the farm now. It used to be everyone knew someone or had a personal interaction with a farmer. And now we're 2 to 3 generations, if not farther, removed from that. And that's why we feel we need to build the bridges and connect the communities. And at this time, if there's nothing more you two had to add, we would like to see if there's any questions on any specific efforts that we have done, or any questions of how farmers are using social media to reach out to communities. They have a mic, if you can wait just a second, that way we can hear you for sure.
I was just curious with what's happening in Japan. Are you getting a lot on your blog about radiation in the milk and what have you?
I actually did see a little bit of mention of that on Twitter when it first came across, and a lot of it was just reassuring people that the milk was safe, and actually with the fact that most cows in California are not on pasture at that point in time, and they're actually being fed a ration, which is a dairy term for meal, that has been harvested many months before that there was no effect on the radiation, or no problem with the radiation in milk at any point in time. And at one point, the level of radiation in the milk, you would have to consume 800 gallons over 8 days before it even approached an unhealthy level. And as much as I would love someone to drink that much milk as a dairy farmer to see the product disappear off the shelves, I don't know if it's humanly possible.
I'd sure like to say something, is that I was so pleased to see that agricultural interest would be here, and I want to thank you personally for being here. We have a diverse economy in California, and have the Central Valley and the farming community here is something that's very positive. Thank you.
I think I can echo for the three of us. Thank you very much for respecting it. Sometimes we do hear a lot of negative stories about agriculture, and that's why we are speaking up, because there's, as Mark said, and forestry being a part of agriculture, there's so many positive stories and so many human sides of the story that we can tell about farming, and the hours and labor that we go through to bring the food to the table, and what it takes to bring that food to the table, the decisions that are made, the effect that weather has. Right now, I don't know how many of you know, the weather is affecting the upper Midwest. It seems like every day that they get a chance to go plant, it rains again. I mentioned Mike Haley before. The poor guy, he has so much time on his hands, he was able to help me build Farmer Bloggers because he wasn't in the field, and every chance he wants to go farm, he can't do it. So I appreciate the appreciation that you show for farmers speaking up.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.